A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him. But no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found a native man who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. His name was Defago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent, listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. Defago, it called. Defago! I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. "What's this all about?" the hunter asked. "It's nothing," Defago said, but the wind continued to call to him. And Defago became more tense and more restless. "Defago," it called. "Defago." Suddenly he jumped to his feet and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. "You can't leave me out here," the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire." Then his voice faded away and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky. But that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet, my burning feet." But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago, and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since then. "Maybe it was the Wendigo," one of them said, and he laughed. "It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say." A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and he asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. No answer. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. We were done making our rounds and heading home, walking. We'd cut through the woods. Then there was an opening and we come on it. Blood everywhere, splattered on the trees, the grass, the creek, everywhere. At first, we figured it was a pack of wolves. We'd seen it sometimes. They can't scavenge and start hunting deer. The worst was when they breed with feral dogs. But this wasn't like that. Something had run up on a den of deer. Wolves won't attack a den, coyotes neither, because they'd get too much of a fight. There were three bodies. Just torn apart. You'd see a head here, a leg here, and a torso there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of carcasses, and we think it's something we gotta take care of. I remember my brother telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs. But I wasn't leaving him, and I damn sure wasn't walking through 2 miles of woods alone, with nothing but a knife and my flintlock. Jeb had the musket, and it was cocked and full up ready, and I wasn't going without it. Took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. Wasn't hard, we just followed the blood. The thing bleed a deer before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile, I don't know. I know that I'd never seen Jeb that scared before that night. We started hearing noises, like trees snapping and things running cold fast. I've been in a lot of woods in my life. I've been all over this world, and ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things. I heard animals screaming. Heard deer and heard fox and rabbits and raccoons and birds, just scared. This is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock at night, except the fox and some birds. Nothing was supposed to even be awake. But they weren't just awake, they were moving. I saw flocks of birds that night fly straight into trees just trying to get out of there. We came up on a pack of coyotes, nearly shot a couple thinking inking it was what we were looking for us, but then we saw they were running towards us. They ran right past us, didn't even notice. Then some deer did the same. Some rabbits and squirrels, foxes, even a couple wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting away from there. What we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to see. It wasn't something old, and something we couldn't kill. I don't know why we didn't just go home. I think that was his nature, to go toward trouble, to fight. We finally get into an open valley. It was normally a cornfield, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks then. A lot of the animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land. But where that deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step. Like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds nearly tore out my damn throat once. All that means is that it's quick and hard to hit. So we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take us long to find where it is. There's this old church that sits on the top of a hill. We get within 50 yards and we hear this noise. A screeching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of 2 different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech, another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards and we hear this sound. I can remember thinking that it sounded like paper being torn apart while someone was swinging water in a bucket back and forth. Jeb looks at me, kneels down and whispers. I gotta stay behind him, 'cause we're about to corner him. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator. But we can tell by the tracks that it's just one. He tells me it's probably a single rabid dog, probably rabid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting it till it don't move anymore, then slit its throat. And if it gets to my brother, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off him. So he walks up, and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side so I can see what it is. I wish to this day I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tears off its flesh, and throws what it doesn't nibble at a side. There's blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human-looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over. And its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with claws at the end. So we see that, and my brother hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person, so he clears his throat to try get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noise just ceased. I ain't ever heard true silence before that, and not after it. But for 2 seconds, nothing made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around, made the shrill cry, and jumped Jeb. He got a shot off. I think he missed. If he hit the thing, it didn't mind, but it was on him, tears parts of him off. I start shooting it with the flintlock point blank, but it barely bled the thing. I got off 3 bullets, and then I started hitting it with the gun butt. But it wasn't budging. It didn't even register that I was there. It's clawing at Jeb, taking off bits of his flesh. It starts on his torso, ripping off the skin, his chest, then it moves up. It tore off his throat, it tore off his nose, his eyes, it scalped him. Then it started digging in, ripped off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones, and that tube in the neck, then his ribs. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow my brother's knife ends up in this thing's shoulder and Jeb ends up on my back. I'm running, and by God I'm running faster than I'd ever run before or after. And it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we've been in. I'm heading towards my landlord's house, 'cause it's half a mile away. I can hear this thing screeching and moaning. I hear these tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone's taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I just ain't looking back. Finally, I trip into chopped wood. I look up, and there's my landlord and bunch of his buddies, drinking brandy around a fire. I scream and I cry, and they come over. I'm telling them to call help, and they look at me, and I'll never forget what they said. "What is that on your back?" they asked me. Just as he said it, he saw one of those god-awful wool shirts my brother wore everywhere. It was what was left of my brother. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. Suddenly we hear it, screeching. He grabs me, Jeb gets thrown on the ground. I'm fighting him, crying, 'cause I think we can still save him, somehow. But my brother had been gone before I ever picked him up. They has to pick me up and throw me inside before I come with him. Others and all, we're all inside, and they're bolting doors and getting new muskets ready. The landlord's asking me what happened, but I just don't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it all together to understand that there was something dangerous there. The fire was still lit just outside, and through the dovetail notches of the cabin wall you could look, and someone ran to call the sûreté. Outside, we see it walk in front of the fire. Don't know what it is, one of them says it looks like an ape. Suddenly, something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but ain't a thing. It's my landlord's dog. Just the body though, not his head or legs. We start pushing things in front of doors and windows, when we hear something round the back. I remember one of his friends saying that the doors were open. We hear wood just get ripped apart. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the muskets were ready. Someone hands me a one. No sooner did I cock the hammer back, did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out, because it was inside. We all rushed to the one door leading to the kitchen and push salting meats and drying apple pieces on the ropes, and they all fall on us, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened the door just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hand through. Someone with a rifle took care of that. Put the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger. Cut its hand off clean. That only pissed it off, though. It started pushing on that door, clawing. We were on one side, pushing as best we could, and it was on the other, doing the same. That wood just wasn't going to hold, so someone tells us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears are ringing, and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded on the top of that door. I don't really know where it went after that. The sûreté got there. I was still glued to that door, what was left of it. The sun was up before they got me off it. They put me in with the nuns for a while. A lot of people talked to me, but I didn't talk back, not for a long, long time. When I got back home, I got a job for the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about the thing. But I signed up for the army when I was 18, and he sat me down to drink some brandy as a send-off. I asked him right away what the sûreté told him. The story they went with was a wild animal, probably a wolf, or maybe a bear that had been hungry or protecting young. I asked him how they could say that when they had the hand. He looks at me, stunned. He tells me that hand never made it back to town. The sûreté who had it died. The hand was never found, probably taken away by an animal. They said it was the paw of a bear that looked like a human hand.